prince disguised as a beggar to test the servant girl. What she said made him marry her. A prince walks out of his palace gates, dressed in rags, hiding his crown beneath soot and dust. The clang of pots, the crackle of a kitchen fire, and there, a servant girl places bread into the beggar's hand. She whispers words so simple, so piercing, they cut deeper than steel. The measure of a man is not his purse, but his heart. But kindness in the kitchen soon turns dangerous. Eh? Cruel noblewoman sees too much. Whispers spread. And when the beggar's mask begins to slip, the servant girl finds herself dragged before the court, accused of witchcraft. In a world where scandal can ruin a crown and one false word means death, one question burns like fire. Will her courage save them both, or will love be silenced before the truth is spoken? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The first rays of dawn painted the Prague sky in gentle hues of pink and gold as Prince Alaric adjusted the coarse wool cloak around his shoulders. His heart beat faster with each step away from the palace's grand entrance. Today, he would leave behind his life of privilege to discover the true nature of his subjects' hearts. He had prepared carefully for this journey. His usually pristine hands were now stained with soot, which he had also smeared across his noble features. The fine leather of his boots had been replaced with worn, cracked footwear that pinched his toes. A small leather pouch containing only a few copper coins hung at his waist, enough to maintain his disguise as a poor wanderer, but not enough to draw unwanted attention. The morning air was crisp, carrying the mingled scents of wood smoke and fresh bread from the castle kitchens. Alaric made his way around the outer walls, his steps uncertain in the unfamiliar boots. The kitchen gate stood before him, its wooden frame weathered by years of use. Servants hurried in and out, carrying baskets of vegetables and sacks of flour for the day's meals. Taking a deep breath, Alaric hunched his shoulders and adopted the weary posture he had observed in the truly destitute. He shuffled through the gate, keeping his head low. The kitchen buzzed with early morning activity, copper pots clanging, fires crackling, and the steady thump of knives against cutting boards. "Be gone with you," a burly cook shouted, waving a wooden spoon in Alaric's direction. "We've no scraps for beggars this early." Several scullery maids turned to stare, their faces twisted with disdain. One whispered to another behind her hand, both giggling unkindly at his ragged appearance. Alaric felt the sting of their scorn more deeply than he had expected. Was this how the poor were treated in his own castle? "Please," he said, making his voice rough and tired, "might you spare a crust of bread for a hungry soul?" "Out! Out!" another servant called. "Before we call the guards." Then a quiet voice spoke up from near the hearth. "Wait." A young woman stepped forward, wiping her hands on her worn apron. Clara Alaric recognized her from his secret observations of the kitchen staff over the past weeks. Her brown hair was tucked neatly beneath a simple cap, and though her dress was plain, it was clean and well-mended. Her hands, he noticed, were reddened and calloused from constant work. She moved to a wooden table where a bowl of broth and a chunk of dark bread sat waiting, clearly her own breakfast. Without hesitation, she picked up both and brought them to Alaric. "Here, sir," she said softly, her eyes kind despite the disapproving murmurs from her fellow servants. "Take these. They're still warm." Alaric stared at her simple offering, touched beyond words by this sacrifice from one who had so little to give. "I cannot take your breakfast, good woman," he protested weakly. Clara's smile was gentle, but firm. "To be poor is no sin, sir. Only hardness of heart condemns a man." She pressed the food into his dirty hands. "Please, eat and be strengthened for your journey." Alaric bowed his head, genuinely humbled. "Your kindness will not be forgotten," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Clara merely smiled faintly and turned back to her duties, returning to the endless tasks that filled a kitchen maid's day. She showed no sign that she recognized him. How could she? Through the soot and shabby clothes. From the shadows near the kitchen hearth, Alaric watched her work. His heart stirred in a way he had never experienced before. Here was true nobility, he realized, found not in fine clothes or grand titles, but in a simple act of kindness from one who could least afford to give. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Clara stood at her usual place near the cooking hearth, kneading dough with practiced movements. Her shoulders ached from the morning's work, but her heart felt light, remembering the grateful look in the beggar's eyes. "Clara!" The head cook's voice boomed across the kitchen. "Come here this instant." She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and hurried over. The head cook, Mistress Agnes, stood with her arms crossed, her round face flushed with anger. "What is this I hear about you giving away a full portion of bread and broth this morning?" Mistress Agnes demanded. "Do you think we can feed every beggar who wanders through these gates?" "It was my own breakfast, mistress," Clara explained softly. "Not from the castle stores." "Foolish girl." The cook's voice rose sharply. "Your breakfast is provided to keep you strong for your duties, not to waste on vagrant strangers." The commotion drew attention from others in the kitchen. Servants paused in their work, watching the scene unfold. Among them, Alaric lingered near the back wall, still in his beggar's disguise. He had returned hoping to observe more of Clara's character, but now his presence had brought her trouble. The clicking of heeled shoes on stone announced another arrival. Lady Isolde swept into the kitchen, her silk skirts rustling with each step. Her cold eyes took in the scene before her. "What is this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the kitchen's warmth like a winter wind. "My lady," Mistress Agnes curtsied deeply. "I was just disciplining a kitchen maid for giving away food to beggars." Lady Isolde's perfectly arched eyebrows rose as she turned her attention to Clara. "Ah, yes. The girl who thinks herself above her station. Tell me, do you imagine yourself some sort of saint, dispensing charity from His Majesty's kitchens?" Clara stood straight, though her cheeks burned red. "No, my lady. It was my own portion, freely given." "Your own portion?" Lady Isolde's laugh was sharp and cruel. "How touching! And I suppose you think such noble sacrifice makes you better than the rest of us?" She turned to address the watching servants. "Take note, all of you. This is what comes of allowing the lower classes to forget their place." Alaric watched Clara's hands tremble, though her face remained composed. His admiration for her quiet dignity grew with each passing moment. 20 lashes should remind her of her proper station, Lady Isolde declared, adjusting her lace cuffs with deliberate slowness. "Fetch the whip." A collective gasp arose from the servants. Clara's face went pale, but she did not cry out or beg for mercy. Before anyone could move to obey Lady Isolde's command, Alaric stepped forward from the shadows. "Begging your pardon, my lady," he said, keeping his voice rough and low, "but might not such harsh punishment prove more costly than a simple bowl of broth?" Lady Isolde whirled to face him, her face contorting with disgust. "Another beggar? How dare you address me?" "'Tis true, I am but a beggar," Alaric continued, bowing with exaggerated humility that bordered on mockery. "Yet even I can see that. A wounded servant cannot work, and idle hands mean less food for your own delicate appetite." Several servants coughed to hide their smiles. Lady Isolde's face flushed an ugly red as she realized the cleverness of his words. She could not punish Clara without affecting her own comforts. "Besides," Alaric added, his eyes twinkling beneath their coating of soot, "would not such cruelty over a simple act of kindness suggest that some folk fear virtue more than vice?" A chorus of poorly suppressed chuckles rippled through the kitchen. Lady Isolde's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, unable to find a suitable response that wouldn't further diminish her dignity. Clara's eyes met Alaric's for a brief moment. In that glance, he saw gratitude mixed with something else, a sharp intelligence that seemed to peer past his disguise, making him wonder if he had revealed too much of his education in his choice of words. He quickly looked away, tugging his ragged cap lower over his face to hide the smile he couldn't quite suppress. His heart beat faster at the memory of her steady gaze. Here was a woman of rare courage and kindness, who faced humiliation and threat of punishment without losing her dignity. He found himself wanting to know more about her, even as he knew he must maintain his distance to preserve his disguise. The evening sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as servants scurried about like mice, preparing for the night's grand banquet. Steam rose from bubbling pots, and the clatter of dishes echoed off the stone walls. Clara stood at her usual spot, kneading dough with practiced hands, while trying not to stare at the mysterious beggar who had positioned himself near the scullery. He scrubbed pots with an awkward grace that seemed out of place. His movements were precise, almost dainty, as though he had never done such work before. Clara noticed how he held the rough brush like it was a delicate thing. His fingers curled around it as one might hold a quill. "Have you heard?" whispered Mary, another kitchen maid, as she hurried past with a stack of plates. "The prince is missing. The whole palace is in an uproar." Clara's hands stilled in the dough. Near the kitchen doorway, two guards spoke in hushed tones, their words carrying across the busy space. "His Grace's chambers are empty," one guard muttered. "No sign of struggle, just gone." "Search every corner," the other replied. "His Majesty is beside himself with worry." The beggar's shoulders tensed ever so slightly at these words. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye, remembering how he had defended her against Lady Isolde's cruel tongue earlier that day. There was something about the way he stood now, straight-backed and proud. Despite his ragged appearance, a chill ran down her spine as she studied him more carefully. His hands, though smudged with soot, were too smooth for a true beggar. The way he carried himself, even in his coarse cloak, spoke of years of proper breeding. When he turned to reach for another pot, she caught a glimpse of his profile. Strong and refined, like the portraits that hung in the great hall. "Sweet heavens," she whispered to herself, nearly dropping the loaf she was shaping. Could it be? The missing prince, here in the kitchens, disguised as a common beggar? Her mind raced back to that morning when she had given him her own bread and broth. The gentle way he had thanked her, his speech too refined for a street beggar. The clever words he had used to defend her from Lady Isolde, words that showed education far beyond that of a common man. The kitchen grew stuffier as evening approached, but Clara felt cold with fear. If this man was truly Prince Alaric, what game was he playing? And if she had guessed correctly, what should she do with such dangerous knowledge? She watched him throughout the evening, her heart beating faster whenever he passed near. Once their eyes met briefly, and she saw something flash in his gaze. Awareness, perhaps, or warning. She quickly looked away, her hands trembling as she continued her work. When the kitchen finally emptied for the night, Clara made her way to the servants' quarters, her mind churning with questions. In her narrow room, she lay upon her thin straw mattress, staring up at the darkness. The rough blanket did little to warm her, but it wasn't cold that kept her shivering. If she spoke of her suspicions and was wrong, she would be labeled a fool at best, a traitor at worst. But if she kept silent and this man was indeed the prince, what then? Was he testing them all? And if so, to what purpose? Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, her thoughts as tangled as yarn in a basket. The weight of her secret pressed. down upon her chest like a stone. One thing she knew with certainty: whether he was prince or pauper, she had treated him with kindness. She could only pray that kindness would not prove her undoing. The first hints of dawn had yet to touch the sky when Clara made her way to the kitchen courtyard. The early morning air bit at her cheeks as she wrapped her thin shawl tighter. She expected to find the hearth cold and quiet, waiting for her morning routine. Instead, the sound of uneven chopping drew her attention. There stood the mysterious beggar, struggling with an axe at the woodpile. His strikes were hesitant, the blade glancing off the logs more often than splitting them. Despite the chill, sweat gleamed on his brow from the effort. Clara pressed her lips together to suppress a smile. "You'll wear yourself out before the day begins, sir," she said softly, approaching the woodpile. "Here, let me show you." He turned, startled by her voice, and Clara caught that noble bearing again in his stance before he remembered to slouch. She held out her hands for the axe, and after a moment's hesitation, he handed it over. "Watch carefully," she instructed, positioning a log on the chopping block. "The trick isn't in strength alone. You must find the grain of the wood." She demonstrated, the axe singing through the air to split the log cleanly. "Like so." "You make it seem effortless," he murmured, his refined accent slipping through despite his attempt to sound common. Over the next several days, the disguised prince remained in the kitchens, working alongside Clara at various tasks. She watched him discreetly, noting how he approached each new challenge with determination, if not skill. When hauling water from the well, he matched her pace, though she could see the strain in his unused muscles. While sweeping ashes from the hearth, he took care not to raise clouds of dust that might trouble the elderly cook's breathing. What touched Clara most was his interaction with young Tom, a scullery boy of barely 8 years. When the child struggled with heavy pots, Alaric would casually appear beside him, steadying the load without making Tom feel small. He listened patiently to the boy's chatter about castle gossip, offering gentle words of encouragement. During bread making, Clara found herself repeatedly correcting his technique. No, she would say, placing her hands over his to guide the movement. Kneading requires rhythm like a dance. Each time their hands met, she noticed how smooth his palms were, another sign of his true station. His quick mind revealed itself in quiet moments. When one of the kitchen maids struggled to calculate portions for a feast, he solved the problem in his head, faster than Clara could count it on paper. Yet he delivered the answer humbly, attributing it to luck rather than education. As days passed, Clara felt her suspicion slowly transform into something more dangerous: admiration. She saw how he truly listened to the servants' concerns, how he remembered their names and stories. This was no mere game to him. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding their lives. After evening prayers one day, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen with him. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting the stone walls in warm hues. The day's work was done, and a peaceful quiet had settled over the usually bustling space. Clara broke off a piece of fresh bread she had saved from the day's baking, offering him half. They sat together on a wooden bench, the silence comfortable between them. The bread was still soft, and the simple meal felt somehow more precious than any feast done as they reached for the last morsel at the same time. Their fingers touched. Clara felt a jolt of awareness course through her, like lightning in her veins. She quickly withdrew her hand, her cheeks flushing warm. When she dared to look up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. That spark of connection lingered in the air between them, full of sweet possibility and terrible danger. Clara knew she should pull away, put proper distance between them. Yet she remained still, savoring the quiet moment and the forbidden warmth blooming in her heart. The evening bells of St. Vitus Cathedral tolled across Prague, their deep bronze notes marking the hour of curfew. Clara stood near the herb garden, her heart fluttering as the disguised beggar, who had worked beside her this past week, gestured toward the moonlit path. "Would you walk with me a moment?" he asked softly. His voice carried an odd note she hadn't heard before, something both gentle and commanding. The herbs released their nighttime fragrance as they passed rosemary, thyme, and mint mingling in the cool air. Clara's worn shoes crunched quietly on the gravel path. The moon hung full and bright above them, casting silver light across the castle grounds. "There is something I must tell you," he said, coming to a stop beside a flowering elderberry bush. His shoulders straightened, and in that moment, the beggar's stoop fell away completely. "I have not been honest about who I am." Clara's throat tightened. Though she had suspected, had seen glimpses of nobility in his bearing, hearing him speak now made her hands tremble. "I am Prince Alaric of Bohemia." The words fell between them like stones in still water. Clara sank into a deep curtsy, her knees weak. "Your Highness," she whispered, her voice hardly more than a breath. "Please," he said quickly, reaching to help her rise. "Do not bow to me." "Not you, Clara. Not after all we've shared." She stood, but kept her eyes lowered, her mind whirling with questions and fears. "Why?" she managed at last. "Why did you pretend to be a beggar?" "Beggar." Alaric stepped closer, his presence warm in the night air. "I wish to know if true kindness still existed in my realm. Not the painted smiles of courtiers, but real goodness of heart. When all others spurned me as a beggar, you alone showed mercy. You shared your bread without thought of reward." Clara's cheeks burned. "I did nothing special, you're my lord." "You did everything special," he corrected gently. "Each day since then, I've watched you work without complaint. Defend those weaker than yourself, and maintain your dignity despite Lady Isolda's cruelty. You've shown me what true nobility means." His words made her heart ache with a sweet pain. She'd never known. But reality pressed cold against her skin like the night air. "My lord, I'm just a kitchen maid. I can never be more. You are everything I seek in a wife and princess." His voice grew tender as he took her hands in his. "I love you, Clara. Your gentle heart, your quiet strength, your unfailing kindness. I wish to marry you." A small gasp escaped her lips. "My lord, you cannot mean it. Such a match would bring scandal to your name. The nobles would never accept a common servant as their princess." "Let them protest," he said firmly. "I would rather have true love in a kitchen than false flattery in 1,000 ballrooms." Clara trembled, torn between joy and terror. "The consequences will be faced together," he finished, raising her hand to his lips. The touch sent warmth, spreading through her entire body. In the silvery moonlight, his eyes held such tenderness that Clara felt tears gathering in her own. For a precious moment, they stood silent in the herb garden, the moon's gentle light wrapping around them like a blessing. The night air carried the sweet scent of elderflowers, and Clara allowed herself to imagine, just for this one enchanted moment, Clara allowed herself to imagine, just for this one enchanted moment, future where love truly could conquer the iron bars of class and custom. "Might I dream, just for tonight?" she whispered. "Dream with me," he answered softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Tonight, let us imagine all that could be." And there in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the healing herbs she knew so well, Clara felt her heart opening to a hope she had never dared to hold before. Dawn crept through the kitchen windows, painting the stone walls in soft amber light. Clara moved through her morning duties as if in a dream, her mind still caught in the moonlit garden where Prince Alaric had confessed his true identity. Her fingers trembled slightly as she kneaded the day's first batch of bread, but she forced herself to focus on the familiar rhythm of fold and press, trying to appear as though nothing had changed. The kitchen bustled with its usual morning chaos pots clanging, fires crackling, and servants calling out to one another across the crowded space. Yet something felt different. Clara could sense, eyes following her movements, watching her every gesture with newfound interest. Lady Isolde swept into the kitchen, her silk skirts rustling against the rough stone floor. She paused, her sharp gaze falling upon Clara's face. The kitchen maid's cheeks held an unmistakable glow, her eyes bright despite the early hour. Lady Isolde's perfectly arched eyebrows drew together in suspicion. "You seem rather cheerful this morning," Lady Isolde remarked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Perhaps you know something about our missing prince?" Clara kept her eyes downcast, focusing on her work. "No, my lady, I know nothing of his highness." But her denial only deepened Lady Isolde's suspicions. Throughout the morning, whispers echoed through the castle corridors. Courtiers gathered in small clusters, their voices hushed as they discussed Prince Alaric's continued absence. Some claimed he had been kidnapped. Others insisted he had fled an unwanted marriage arrangement. Each theory seemed more outlandish. Then the last Lady Isolde moved through these gossip circles like a spider spinning her web. She watched Clara from shadowy corners, noting how the kitchen maid sometimes paused in her work, lost in thought with the ghost of a smile upon her lips. After 3 days of observation, Lady Isolde approached Martha, a bitter-faced scullery maid known for her jealousy of Clara's position. 5 silver pieces, Lady Isolde murmured, pressing the coins into Martha's palm. "Follow her. Tell me everything." The trap was laid with cruel precision. Martha followed Clara everywhere, to the herb garden, to the market, even to evening prayers. She noted how Clara sometimes spoke in whispers with a raggedly dressed man in the kitchen, how their hands would briefly touch when passing dishes or tools. On the 4th morning, Lady Isolde made her move. She burst into the kitchen with 4 armed guards, her face a mask of righteous anger. "Seize her," she commanded, pointing at Clara. "This witch has bewitched our prince." Clara stood frozen beside the hearth she had tended so faithfully, her face draining of color. "What? No. Please, I have done nothing wrong." "Lies!" Lady Isolde's voice rang through the kitchen. "You were seen conducting strange rituals in the herb garden, speaking incantations to a mysterious figure. The prince vanishes, and suddenly you glow with secret joy. Witch!" The guards grabbed Clara's arms roughly. She struggled, flour dust falling from her apron like snow. "Please," she begged. "I am no witch." But she could not reveal the truth without betraying Alaric's trust. Got other servants gathered in doorways and corners, their faces filled with fear and sorrow as Clara was dragged from her beloved kitchen. Tears streamed down her face as she was pulled through the grand hall, its gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers reflecting her shame back at her 100 times over. Near the great doors, the disguised prince stood among a group of servants, his fists clenched at his sides as he watched Clara being dragged past, her soft sobs echoing in the vast space. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He could no longer maintain his deception, not when the woman he loved faced such danger. The time had come to reveal himself, whatever the cost. The great hall loomed vast and cold, its marble columns stretching toward vaulted ceilings where morning light filtered through stained glass. Nobles lined the walls in their silks and velvets, their whispers echoing like rustling leaves. At the center, Clara stood before the high council table, her simple wool dress stark against the opulent surroundings. Though her face was pale, she held herself straight, hands clasped before her. "Lady," Isolde's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "My lords, this kitchen maid has committed the gravest of crimes. Through dark arts and witchcraft, she has bewitched our beloved Prince Alaric, causing his mysterious absence these past days. Her silk skirt swished as she circled Clara like a predator. Such treachery deserves death. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The priests crossed themselves, their dark robes shifting in the shadows. Guards tightened their grip on pike handles, armor clinking softly. "What say you to these charges?" demanded the eldest counselor, his white beard quivering. Before Clara could speak, movement stirred near the servants' entrance. A figure stepped forward, wrapped in a beggar's worn cloak. In one fluid motion, he cast off the ragged garment, revealing rich clothing beneath. Gasps echoed through the hall as Prince Alaric stood revealed, his noble bearing unmistakable despite the traces of soot still marking his face. "My lords," his voice rang clear and strong, "these accusations are false. Clara is innocent of all wrongdoing." He strode forward, boots clicking against marble. "I chose to live among the servants, disguised, to test the true nature of those who serve us. While others showed scorn to a seeming beggar, Clara alone offered kindness. She saved not through witchcraft, but through the pure virtue of her heart." The king rose slowly from his throne, face darkening like storm clouds. "My son, you dishonor yourself and the crown. Whatever game you played at, whatever misguided affection you feel, it changes nothing. A prince cannot marry a kitchen maid. Such a match would disgrace our ancient lineage." Clara stepped forward, trembling but determined. "Your Majesty, my lords," her voice was soft but steady, "I swear upon my immortal soul, I never sought Prince Alaric's love. My only wish was to live honestly, to serve faithfully, and to show kindness where I could. If that is a crime, then I must bear the punishment. Though my conscience remains clear." Silence fell heavy as winter snow. The council members exchanged glances, their faces grave. Finally, the eldest spoke again. "This matter requires careful deliberation. Until judgment is passed, the accused shall be confined to the castle dungeons." Guards stepped forward, taking Clara's arms. She did not resist as they led her away, though tears glimmered unshed in her eyes. Alaric moved to follow, but his father's sharp command stopped him. "You will remain here, my son." The heavy door of Clara's cell clanged shut, its echo rolling through the stone corridors. In the darkness that followed, only the guttering torch in its wall bracket gave light. Hours passed like centuries until soft footsteps approached. Alaric appeared beyond the iron bars, his face shadowed with grief and determination. Though guards stood watchful at the corridor's end, he pressed close to the cell. "Clara," he whispered, voice rough with emotion, "I swear by all I hold sacred, I will not let them harm you. Whatever price must be paid, whatever sacrifice required, I will not let you die. Die." Clara pressed her fingers to the cold bars, merely, but not quite touching his. In the torch's flickering light, their eyes met and held, speaking volumes that could not be voiced. Around them, the ancient stones of the castle stood silent witness to a love that defied the boundaries of class and custom, while overhead, the weight of judgment still hung suspended. Dawn crept through the narrow window of Clara's cell, where she knelt on the cold stone floor. Her simple dress was wrinkled from sleep, but her spirit remained unbroken. A single candle flame danced before her, its warm light catching the tears on her cheeks as she whispered her morning prayers. The words came easily, practiced from countless dawns in the kitchen when she had risen early to bake the day's bread. Meanwhile, in the bustling courtyards and corridors of the castle, Prince Alaric moved with purpose. Gone was his beggar's disguise. He now wore the simple but fine clothes of his station, though he kept the humility he had learned in the kitchens. He knew that Clara's fate rested not just on noble judgment, but on the testament of those who knew her best thought in the stables. Young Thomas, a boy of 12 with straw-colored hair, spoke earnestly to the prince. Last winter, when the harvest failed and food was scarce, Clara shared her portions with us younger ones, he said, twisting his cap in his hands. She said no child should go hungry while she had bread to give, even when her own stomach growled. She smiled and told us stories to keep our spirits up. The laundress, Martha, wiped her rough hands on her apron as she added her voice. 3 months passed when fever swept through the servants' quarters. Clara worked double shifts. She was sick herself, Your Highness, burning with fever, but still, she tended to others. I saw her stumbling with exhaustion, yet she never complained. She brewed herbs for the sick and changed linens till her hands were raw. Even Mistress Agnes, the stern head cook who had often scolded Clara, spoke up with reluctant admiration. The girl saved more than just hungry bellies, she admitted, her usually harsh voice softening. Last autumn, when grease caught fire in the kitchen, everyone panicked. But Clara, she kept her head, threw salt on the flames and saved not just the kitchen, but probably half the castle. Never sought praise for it either. As Alaric gathered these testimonies, something remarkable began to happen. Servants who had stayed silent out of fear now found their courage. Kitchen maids spoke of Clara's patient teaching. Guards recalled her kind words during long night watches. And even the castle seamstress remembered how Clara had spent her few free hours mending clothes for elderly servants who could no longer thread their own needles. The story spread beyond the castle walls, carried by merchants and messengers, into the town below. In the marketplace, shopkeepers recalled how Clara always shared castle leftovers with hungry children. The baker's wife spoke of times Clara had helped her carry heavy flour sacks without being asked. The elderly herb woman remembered Clara's visits to gather remedies for sick servants, always taking time to listen to the old woman's tales. Soon, a quiet murmur grew through the cobbled streets and castle corridors. Townsfolk gathered in small groups, speaking of Clara's goodness. Ladies' maids whispered to their mistresses of Clara's gentle heart. Even some of the younger nobles, moved by the stories, began to question whether such a woman could truly be capable of dark magic. Prince Alaric stood at his chamber window, watching the growing crowds in the castle courtyard. Hope warmed his heart as he saw how Clara's true character had touched so many lives. Perhaps the voice of the people, from the lowest scullery maid to the merchants in their shops, would speak louder than Lady Isolda's accusations. In their united testimony lay a power that even the stern faces of the royal council might not ignore. The candle in Clara's cell burned steadily as morning light filled the small space. She remained unaware of the tide of support rising beyond her walls, but her prayers never wavered in their simple faith and acceptance. The great hall hummed with tension as morning light streamed through tall windows. Hundreds of candles flickered in iron chandeliers, casting dancing shadows on the tapestried walls. The king sat rigid upon his carved throne, his face stern beneath his graying beard. Before him, Clara stood in her simple gray dress, hands clasped, head bowed but shoulders straight. One by one, witnesses stepped forward on trembling legs. Young Thomas, the stable boy, spoke first, his voice quavering but growing stronger as he described Clara's selfless sharing of food during the winter famine. The laundress Martha followed, telling of Clara's tireless work during the fever outbreak. Even Mistress Agnes, the head cook, praised Clara's quick thinking during the kitchen fire. As each person spoke, the murmurs from the gathered crowd grew louder. Servants packed the back of the hall, their usual silence forgotten as they nodded and whispered confirmation of each testimony. Merchants from the town added their voices, speaking of Clara's kindness to hungry children and elderly neighbors. Lady Isolda's face grew darker with each witness. She stood near the throne, her expensive silk gown rustling as she shifted impatiently. When she finally brought forward her own witnesses' servants she had bribed to speak against Clara, they wilted under the council's questioning. "You claim you saw the accused practicing dark arts," the eldest counselor said to a trembling scullery maid. "Yet just last week, did you not tell the cook's helper that Clara was the most God-fearing woman you knew?" The girl burst into tears, confessing Lady Isolde had promised her a new dress to lie. One by one, the false witnesses crumbled, their stories unraveling like cheap thread. The people's voices grew from murmurs to a steady roar of support. "Justice for Clara," they called. "She's worth 10 noble ladies." Even some of the younger nobles joined in, having heard tales of Clara's virtue from their own servants. Prince Alaric, who had stood silent through the testimonies, now stepped forward. His fine clothes and straight bearing drew all eyes, but it was the passion in his voice that held them. "Honored father," he addressed the king directly, "noble council, we speak of nobility as if it were merely a matter of birth. Yet if nobility is measured by compassion, then Clara has more right to a crown than any here." His clear voice rang through the hall. "I have seen her share her last crust of bread, tend the sick when she herself could barely stand, and face cruelty with unwavering dignity. These are the qualities that should define true nobility." Lady Isolde could contain herself no longer. She rushed forward, her face twisted with rage. "This is madness. She's nothing but a common servant. She has bewitched you all with her false humility and enough." The king's voice thundered through the hall, silencing every whisper. He stood slowly, his aged face troubled as he looked from his son to Clara to the gathered crowd. The council members shifted uneasily, well aware of the hundreds of eyes watching, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. After what seemed an eternity, the king spoke again, his voice heavy with authority. "We have heard truth today, truth, from the hearts of honest people. And though it pains me to admit, perhaps I too have measured nobility by too narrow a standard." He paused, then continued firmly, "Clara is hereby declared innocent of all charges and shall be set free." The hall erupted in cheers. Before anyone could move, Prince Alaric strode to Clara's side and took her hand in his. Lifting it high, he declared in a ringing voice, "And I, Prince Alaric of Bohemia, will marry her, servant or not. Let all hear and witness my vow." The servants' ranks exploded with joy, their cheers drowning out Lady Isolde's shriek of fury. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Alaric, her fingers tightening around his. The morning sun streamed through the windows, setting them both aglow as the celebrations began. The cathedral bells of St. Vitus tolled across Prague, their deep bronze voices echoing through narrow streets and ancient squares. Morning sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor where nobles in rustling silks stood shoulder to shoulder with peasants in simple wool. The air was thick with the sweet smoke of incense and the scent of early summer roses. Clara stood just inside the great doors, her heart fluttering like a bird beneath the ivory satin of her wedding gown, a gift from the queen herself. The dress whispered against the flagstones, its pearl-sewn bodice catching the light. Her red gold hair had been woven with white flowers and tiny gems, and though her hands trembled as they clasped her bouquet of lily, her eyes shone with quiet joy. "Ready, my dear?" The king himself stood beside her, offering his arm. He had insisted on giving her away, a gesture that had brought tears to her eyes when he announced it. Now he smiled down at her, his stern face softened with unexpected fondness. "Yes, your majesty," Clara whispered, placing her hand upon his sleeve. The massive doors swung open, and the cathedral's full glory stretched before them. Hundreds of candles, garlands of flowers, and faces turned expectantly toward her. The organ's rich voice filled the vast space as Clara took her first step. She saw the kitchen maids who had worked beside her, now dressed in their Sunday best, beaming with pride. The stable boys who had testified for her stood straighter, caps clutched in their hands. Even the merchants from the town square had closed their shops to attend Dot, and there, at the altar, stood Alaric. His formal uniform gleamed with gold braid, but it was the love shining in his eyes that made Clara's heart leap. Each step brought her closer to him, closer to a future she had never dared dream possible. Lady Isolde lurked in a shadowed alcove, her face twisted with bitterness. She wore black, as if in mourning for her ruined ambitions. Few noticed when she slipped away partway through the ceremony, her departure marking the end of her influence at court. The Archbishop's voice rang clear as he spoke the ancient words. Clara's voice trembled, but held firm as she made her vows. Alaric's strong hands clasped hers as he pledged his own heart, his smile radiant with joy. Then came the moment that drew gasps from the assembled crowd. The king stepped forward, bearing not one crown, but two. The first he placed upon Alaric's brow, the traditional crown of the heir. But the second, a delicate circlet of gold and pearls, he lifted high for all to see before setting it gently upon Clara's head. "Rise," he commanded, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the cathedral, "and greet your prince and princess." The cheers that erupted shook the very foundations. The common folk saw in Clara's elevation their own hopes made real proof that virtue and kindness could triumph over birth and station. Servants wept openly, market women threw flowers, and even the sternest nobles found themselves moved by the pure joy of the moment. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Alaric led Clara onto the palace's great balcony. Below, the city celebrated with bonfires and dancing in the streets. The new princess stood in wonder, her hand clasped tight in her husband's, gazing out over the twinkling lights of Prague. "From beggar to prince," Alaric murmured, drawing her close, and kitchen maid to princess. Who would have believed it? "Those who understand that true nobility lies in the heart," Clara answered softly, thinking of all the hands that had worked and voices that had spoken to bring them to this moment. They stood together as the stars began to shine, their love a beacon of hope for all who saw them, living proof that faith, virtue, and genuine affection could overcome any barrier, even the ancient walls between noble and common blood. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.